Good afternoon. It's good to be here with all of you. Good to see everyone that could make it back this afternoon. We're continuing our series in Ecclesiastes. Here we're going to be looking at chapter 4, and we're going to be looking at the whole of chapter 4 here as we talk about companionship is going to be the main focus of this chapter here that Solomon has written. If you'd like to turn with me, we're going to go ahead and read the whole chapter, verses 1 through 16, to introduce our thoughts. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, Solomon writes, "Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Again, I saw that for all toil and every skillful work, a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful with quietness than both hands fold together with toil and grasping for the wind. Then I returned and saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for the wind." And this may seem like a random mass of knowledge and proverbs that we just read, and in some ways it is. It's just kind of a clump of knowledge here. But our goal for this afternoon is to hopefully show that there is a theme to all of this. There's an overarching connection to all of this in chapter 4, and that's the idea of companionship. Hence our title, Better Together. We need to live under the sun. We're better under the sun when we live with companionship. Because we spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves. We think about how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, what I want, and what I've accomplished in my life. And it's easy to slip into making myself the object of all of my thoughts and all of my work and all of my actions under the sun. But that only leads us to where Solomon is and where he has been in this book, believing that everything is vanity, that life is nothing but vapor and grasping for the wind. David Gibson writes in his book, Living Life Backwards, he says, "People fill their thoughts and plans with themselves as they constantly work out how to navigate the world in a way that will give meaning and happiness." And says the preacher, that is the very source of our pain. Thinking only of ourselves and only thinking about me and my life causes so much of the pain that I might feel in my everyday life and in my struggles in life. Instead, Solomon is going to show us in this chapter what it can do for us to start thinking about others instead of just ourselves. That's the people that are beside us every day of our lives, our friends and our family, our coworkers, those that we care about, or even just our neighbors, people that maybe we don't know. But he says that we begin to experience something deeper in our lives when we think about others and not just ourselves. He says that we feel quietness in our souls in verse 6, meaning that we have rest and we have calmness and satisfaction and joy in our lives. And all the sections that we've covered in the whole book of Ecclesiastes so far, not just chapter 4, Solomon is slowly building a picture of what wise living looks like. Not wisdom under the sun, but what real wisdom looks like. In the earlier chapters, Solomon looked at pleasure and possessions and vanity, and he said, this is not how you find wise living. This is not the meaning of life. And now in chapter 4, he says that trying to get ahead of your neighbor and your fellow man, trying to tear others down is not the way to live a wise life either. You can't live a wise and a good life by focusing only on yourselves. Instead, we need to live with other people, and we need to not work against them, not work against each other in rivalry and selfishness. And last time I spoke, we talked about work, and we talked about finding enjoyment in the work that we do in our lives. And in this section, the message is similar. We need to enjoy life with others, too. We need to enjoy life with the people that God has given us in our lives because they're a gift to us as well. Our neighbors and our companions are a beautiful gift from God in our lives. So here's how we're going to split up these seemingly random sections here. Solomon gives us two ways that we can live our lives under the sun. Points 1 and 2 here. He says we can live in a way that we hate our neighbors, where we do everything we can to work against them, and they are an obstacle in our lives. And he shows us that really only hurts ourselves in the end. We're working against ourselves too. And then number 2, he says we can live loving our neighbors, and he's going to show us how that is the better way, and it causes us to love ourselves as well. And then the points A through E here, these are the 5 units of thought, or the 5 proverbs that he gives here. And if you remember back to our very first sermon that we gave about Ecclesiastes, Aaron talked about biblical poetry and Hebrew poetry, and this is one of the examples that he gave of an element of Hebrew poetry. These are 5 units that kind of seem random, but really they all work together to talk about one theme, and that's what we're going to look at. All of these are talking about sharing and companionship in our lives. So section A, the first one we're going to look at, kind of intros the rest of the sections and leads us into what we're going to talk about. Section A, Solomon says, there are people who have no comforter. And let's read verses 1 through 3. Again, here I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible. Solomon says, then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And power was on the side of their oppressors, but they had no one to comfort them. So I congratulated the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still living. But better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. And in verse 1 here, Solomon says that he again looked at the oppression under the sun, meaning that he's looking at it a second time. He first looked at oppression in chapter 3. This is the last time that Aaron spoke, and he talked about wickedness in the place of judgment. He said that there is real evil in the world that Solomon has looked at. And here he's seeing the same thing. He's seeing oppression and evil, but he's looking at it in a different way. Solomon is overwhelmed by the pain and violence that's in the world instead of just the injustice. He says that there are people who are suffering and they can't defend themselves. And worst of all, it feels like no one is stepping in to help them in the moment. And it would be easy to point at this passage and say, again, that this is an under-the-sun passage. This is negative, and maybe Solomon is exaggerating how the world really is. This isn't how the world is, but we can find lots of examples in our lives to show that what Solomon is saying is true. There are people who are oppressed. There are terrible tragedies, and there are wars in the world. There are people who abuse and manipulate and oppress others every day. Solomon's view of the world is not far off from what it really is. But notice what Solomon's main concern seems to be here. He is bothered by the fact that these people are oppressed, but he seems especially bothered by the fact that they are alone. He says twice that there is no one to comfort these people. So we can see that he's looking at oppression done under the sun a second time because he's looking at it through fresh eyes. He's thinking about it through the lens of companionship in our lives. He's not just belaboring that there is evil in the world. He's already established that in the last chapter. But instead, he's emphasizing the fact that maybe the greatest tragedy is that these people are alone. There's no one to comfort them in their lives. So conclusion number 1 for us, life becomes darker when we face suffering alone. And it becomes worse when we ignore others who are suffering alone. We need to think about others. Think about other people who might be suffering in this life and who have no one to comfort them. Because nobody should have to face life under the sun alone. That leads us to the place where Solomon is, where he thinks that life isn't worth living at all if you're facing it alone. So we're going to consider 2 ways that we can live our lives in order to avoid this view of life, thinking that nothing is worth living for. There's no point to life at all. And the first way is the wrong way to look at it. Solomon says that we can hate our neighbors and destroy ourselves in our lives. This is the negative or the earthly or under the sun way of living, whatever you want to think about. This is the way of life that's all about me and not thinking about anyone else. It's ignoring other people who are suffering. And Solomon shows us 3 ways that living like this causes us to hate our neighbors, even if we don't realize it, and destroy ourselves. Section B, he says, man is envied by his neighbor in verses 4 through 6. Verse 4, he says, I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a person and his neighbor. This too is futility and striving after wind. So again, this is the under the sun perspective of living. But again, it's easy to see that Solomon isn't far off base. We see a lot of people working out of rivalry towards each other. Solomon says he looks at the world of work and he sees a world full of workaholics, people that work themselves to death, working out of envy towards each other. They tear each other up in order to build them. They tear each other down in order to build themselves up. And it's the attitude of me first before everyone else. In this world, it's all about me, and secretly I want to have everything that you have, but just a little bit more to be better. And I want to do everything that you do, but do it just a little bit better than you do. And really what it is very thinly veiled hatred towards our neighbors and our fellow man. But that's the motivation behind so many workaholics in the world, and that's what Solomon sees in his world. So number one, we can destroy ourselves when we hate our neighbors by envying them. And we've talked about how our work is a gift from God. God gave us work for a reason, and we should enjoy it. But here Solomon sees that man's work under the sun can be twisted into sin as well. Our work can be sinful if we go about it the wrong way. And that's when all we think about is work, and our work comes from a selfish heart, and it comes from envy towards others in our lives. Some examples of this is the classic idea of keeping up with the Jones. You're working just to make sure that you have a little bit more than your neighbors. You have a little bit shinier car, a little bit nicer house than whoever might be living around you. Or maybe it's about climbing the ladder at work, where you're not working because you love the job or working because you love your coworkers, but because you can't stand to see other people succeed more than you. This work is less about excellence and it's more about our ego in our lives. Or maybe we compete with our kids. We push our kids into endless activities to make sure they're just a little bit better than your friends' kids or whoever else you might run into in your lives. And the root of everything here is not a love for work like we should experience, and it's not about enjoying people and loving all the things that God has given us. This work is about ego. It's about selfishness, and it's about envy in our lives. And Solomon says this is vapor, and it's grasping for the wind in our lives. Conclusion number 2, envy turns work into rivalry, and it robs it all of all joy in our lives. And this is not the way that it should be. Paul writes in Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. So all our striving and work in our life should not be motivated by just myself. We need to think about others. What do others need? How can I be a giver instead of a getter in my life? And when we stop to think about that and start thinking about serving others instead of just ourselves, it'll prevent the two other extremes that we're going to talk about that we can fall into in our lives. Solomon says that we can fall into extreme laziness. We destroy ourselves and we hate our neighbors through laziness. Verse 5, it says, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Laziness is a way that we can hate our neighbors, even if it doesn't seem like it. We can hate our neighbors through laziness because we have nothing to offer them in this life. We're not willing to work for them at all because we're not even willing to work for ourselves if we're so lazy. And it's a vivid picture that Solomon paints. He says this lazy man refuses to work or to give to others or to do anything for anyone other than himself. And in the end, he consumes himself. David Gibson writes, instead of embracing life and giving himself to others, the sluggard gives himself to himself. So in the end, all that he has left is himself, and that won't last for long. There's no food in the cupboard, and he has to eat himself to survive. And the fool or the lazy man here, he isn't literally consuming himself, but instead laziness is destroying him, and it'll destroy us too. It destroys our self-control. It destroys our care for others. We can only think about ourselves. And eventually it destroys our own self-respect too. It leaves us destitute in our lives. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 9 through 11 says, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. And often in life we warn people that work too much, that on their deathbed, they're not going to wish that they had worked more, they'd spent more time in the office. But Solomon warns that maybe some people will wish they had worked more, that they'd spent a little bit more time working in their lives because they've wasted their life away being lazy. God has given us work for a reason, and that's shown in the lazy fool. The opposite is shown. We can't enjoy our work, we can't enjoy the blessings of work, and we can't help others if we're not working at all because we're not even working for ourselves. So don't be like the sinful and the lazy fool in verse 5. Number 3, we can destroy ourselves and hate our neighbors through extreme busyness as well. Verse 6, one handful of rest is better than 2 fists full of labor and striving after the wind. Frantic busyness and being a busybody is just as empty as laziness in our lives, and it can destroy us just as much. Some people rush from one thing to the next in their lives. They're always chasing tomorrow and not thinking about today. Maybe they think that life will finally slow down tomorrow or next week. I'll have more time next month maybe, and I'll be a little bit less busy. And then I'll have more time to read the Bible. I'll have a cleaner house, and then I can think about others. Then I can work for others in my life, but I just can't do that right now. But Solomon says that's a trap in our lives, and we need to avoid it at all costs. Again, David Gibson says, the preacher's point is that to live this way is like shooting yourself in one foot so that you can hop more quickly with the other. Why not stop and enjoy today in very real ways? We need to stop chasing the wind in our busyness in our lives. Don't keep telling yourself that the future will fix everything. You don't know what tomorrow holds. You might not be here tomorrow, or these might be the very best days that we have in our lives. We don't know. Stop and enjoy it with the people that you love and with the people that God has blessed you with in your life. Matthew 6 and verse 34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. So instead of worrying about tomorrow, live the life that you have now, that God has given you. Think about others and work for others. Enjoy what God has given you and find contentment in your work, because true peace comes from knowing that less can be more in your life. Less can be enough. Conclusion number 3, laziness and busyness both disconnect us from others, and it ends up destroying us in the end. And I couldn't talk about this section in Ecclesiastes without reading probably my very favorite song that we sing from our brother Ivan Costa based on this verse, called Just a Handful. He writes, Lord, I don't want earthly riches that so many people prize, but I pray for just a handful of the simple things in life. I had nothing when I entered as a newborn baby child. I'll have nothing when my loved ones come to say their last goodbyes. Oh, the quiet that we forfeit over wealth and keeping up, never learning in our hurry that a handful is enough. Lord, I pray for just a handful and for quiet in my soul. Help me spurn the greed of others and use my handful for the Lord. And next, Solomon is going to show us what that looks like, what it looks like to live for others and to live for the Lord in our life. Number 2, loving my neighbor and loving myself. So Solomon is going to show us the opposite view of the world. This is the way to live wisely in our lives. And that's through loving and working with our neighbors and focusing on companionship instead of isolation. Section C, he says, there is one alone in verses 7 through 8. He says, then I looked again at futility under the sun. There was a man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother, yet there was no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, for whom do I labor and deprive myself of pleasure? This too is futility, and it is an unhappy task. So Solomon again turns to look at labor and futility under the sun. We've talked about labor a lot so far, but he's looking at it again with fresh eyes. He's looking at it through the lens of companionship here. He introduces us to a man who is rich beyond means probably, but he is all alone. This is a man that has 2 hands full of labor and striving after the wind, like he just talked about in verse 6. He has no wife, no children, no friends, and no family to speak of, but he works himself to the bone anyways. And he keeps working for maybe the next payday or the next bonus, not for others in his life. He deprives himself of pleasure and rest and enjoying life, but it never satisfies him because there's no meaning, there's no purpose in life if we don't share it with others. He has everything except joy in his life because he is alone. But that's not how God made us to live. God did not make us to live alone. Conclusion number 4, we were made for companionship, not isolation in our lives. And that's been true since the beginning. All the way back in Genesis 2:18, God says, "It is not good that man should be alone." So he created the first companion, Eve, in the garden to spend life with Adam and to help him in his life. Because life alone is futility and it's an unhappy task, like Solomon says. And this is another passage that's an under the sun passage, and it seems negative, but really it's a positive section. We're not supposed to look at this and say, we need to live like the unhappy man here. But he's using this proverb to teach us to do the opposite if we don't want to be described like this rich and lonely man. Solomon doesn't want us to just feel bad for him. He wants us to ask ourselves, are we living like this too? Are we living just for ourselves? This passage reminds us that having everything means nothing if we have no one to share it with. We can be rich in things but bankrupt in relationships. So if we want to live with purpose, unlike this rich and lonely man, we need to live with other people. And that's exactly where Solomon is going to go next in these next few verses. This man has everything except companionship, and now he's going to show us why that is a so much better life to have companionship in verses 9 through 12. He says, 2 are better than 1. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. For if either one of them falls, then one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if 2 lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone, 2 can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. And usually we read this passage at weddings. We think about marriage, and we use this as an example of marriage, where it's 2 people being joined together, and then God is that 3rd strand in the cord to strengthen that relationship. And that's not a wrong interpretation of that, but we can get even simpler than that. Solomon is not necessarily talking about marriage. He doesn't mention God here. He's just talking about companions. He's talking about companionship. Solomon is saying life's value isn't found in what you've earned. He just showed that with the rich, lonely man, but it's about who you share it with. When you work with others, he says, you'll succeed more. You'll have a good return for your labor, but more importantly, you won't be alone. Think back to verse 1 of chapter 4 here. He says the greatest tragedy under the sun in the world of oppression was that there were people who had no one to comfort them. There were people who were alone. And here he says one of the greatest things that you can gain in life is to have a companion, someone to lift you up when you fall down. And the statement is true the more companions we talk about. Solomon isn't saying that you need 1 companion and maybe 2, and that's the max that you can have. The statement 2 are better than 1 is a general truth. We could keep going on and on. We could say that 3 are better than 2, 4 are better than 5, and 5 are better than 4, and so on and so on. If a 3-strand cord is not quickly torn apart, imagine how strong a 5-strand cord or a 10-strand cord could be. The more companions we have, the better we will be in our lives. Think about how strong a place like Chapel Grove with 100 strands could be if we're living for each other and working for each other as one body of Christ. Conclusion number 5, real strength and joy come from living life together, not alone. And the simple way is life is better together. We're stronger together when we're working for and with each other. So we need to love our neighbors, and we will love ourselves too. Finally, section E, Solomon says, better a poor and wise youth in verses 13 through 16. He says, a poor yet wise youth is better than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to receive instruction. For he has come out of prison to become king, even though he was born poor in his kingdom. I have seen all those living under the sun move to the side of the second youth who replaces him. There is no end to all the people, to all who were before him. Even the ones who will come later will not be happy with him, for this too is futility and striving after wind. So our final example, our final proverb here is about poor but wise man who becomes king in the kingdom. And he replaces an old, foolish king who stopped listening to the advice of others. He doesn't listen to anyone else anymore because he's become proud. But on the other side, there's a classic rags to riches tale. This young man who comes from prison, he's poor and he's destitute, but he rises to the role of king in the nation. He's a very popular king, Solomon tells us. It's very similar to the story of Joseph that we read, where he comes all the way from prison to be the right-hand man of Pharaoh. And at first, the people love this young king. They immediately toss this old king to the side in favor of him. And Solomon says, all those living under the sun move to the side of the poor and wise youth. He is unanimous support. But eventually, we see that he's forgotten too. His fame fades, and just like the king before him, a new and more popular young king comes and replaces him, just like the old king before him. And there are really two lessons here. One is that we can't find meaning in life in status. We've already talked about that in the book of Ecclesiastes, and here's just another little reminder of that. You'll never find meaning in status or in power. But the most important message for us this afternoon is the contrast between the two kings here. Solomon says that the old king refused to take the advice of others. He was proud. He wouldn't listen to anyone who wanted to instruct him. But this young man was teachable. He was humble, and assumedly he listened to others. A humble young man who listens to others is better than the old and powerful king who won't listen to others through pride. Number 6, teachable humility is better than isolated greatness in our lives under the sun. Proverbs 19:20 says, "Listen to counsel and receive instruction that you may be wise in your latter days." So a teachable heart is one that welcomes others in. It asks for advice and instruction from others. It's all about creating space for our neighbors and loving our neighbors because we value their opinion in our lives. But pride does the opposite. It isolates us because we think that we're better than others. But eventually we will see that we will be replaced just like this old king. Solomon's message is clear. The people who live their best lives under the sun are not the ones that rise the highest, but the ones who walk humbly with others. And they lead a life that's formed through humility and companionship and a love for other people in their lives. In conclusion this afternoon, I just want to go back through our main conclusions here, and then I'll be done. Number 1, life becomes darker when we face suffering alone, and it's worse when we ignore those who suffer alone. Solomon wasn't just upset in this chapter about the fact that there was oppression, but he was upset that there were people who were alone in the face of oppression. We're never meant to walk through this life alone, and we need to live with others and care for others who might be alone as well. Number 2, envy turns work into rivalry, and it robs it of all joy in our lives. Envy causes us to compare ourselves to others and overwork ourselves, to become workaholics. When work becomes about me instead of others that we love, it loses all joy, and it's pointless in our lives. Number 3, laziness and busyness both disconnect us from others, and it destroys us in the end. The lazy person gives nothing to others and ends up consuming himself, while the busy person is so frantic that he never stops to live life. Both extremes lead us to be isolated and empty in our lives. Number 4, we were made for companionship, not isolation. A life that's full of achievements, but without people to share those achievements with, is meaningless. Number 5, real strength and joy come from living life together. Solomon says that 2 are better than 1 because companionship brings reward, it brings support, warmth, and protection. The more companions we have, the stronger our lives under the sun will become. And number 6, teachable humility is better than isolated greatness. Pride isolates us from people, it makes us think we're better than others, but humility welcomes others in and helps us to build a community of people who love each other. So we were never meant to live under the sun alone. We were never meant to live our lives alone. But we find joy and we find quietness in our lives when we realize that we're better together than we are apart.
Thanks for watching this video. I know what you're thinking. I don't want to miss another video from this channel. In order to avoid that, click on the red button down there, subscribe, and then click the bell icon. Not only will that alert you each time a new video is uploaded to the channel, it will also help spread the channel to other people's awareness. So, go ahead, do it. Like right now, click on it.